So one of the biggest compromises in small form factor computing is CPU cooling, and although processors are becoming more efficient and a lot easier to cool in general as time goes on, there's only so much power that you can still cram inside a small form factor computer. Now we've tested a lot of CPU coolers like this one here, but one that we've yet to test is this guy right here, the Alpenfohn Blackridge. The reason that this one is so exciting from a performance standpoint is because it was actually developed by the creator of the Dan A4 SFX. So let's see how far we can really push this thing. So before we dive in, I'll just say that this cooler is easily one of the nicest that I've come across. Looks and appearance are usually not something that I mention when it comes to CPU coolers because it's mostly irrelevant, but this is the first heatsink that I've picked up and said, damn, that is a nice looking CPU cooler. The entire heatsink is finished in a metallic gunmetal gray, which will look nice in pretty much any system. And one thing I love is the sheer density when it comes to the fin array. From that alone, you can tell that the cooling performance is at the top of the priority list. Another spec that screams performance here are the 6mm copper heat pipes that can just squeeze their way onto the copper cold plate. For reference, many competing low-profile coolers use 4 heat pipes, so on paper at least, the Blackridge does have an advantage. The most important spec worth mentioning though is the height of the low-profile cooler itself, seeing as this will limit what cases are compatible, and I can only really think of 2, maybe 3 cases off the top of my head that aren't compatible with the Alpenfohn Blackridge. The height here comes in at 47mm, so it's going to be a snug fit in cases like the Dan A4 SFX and the Velka 5. That also makes the direct competitor to this cooler the Cryorig C7 Copper and C7 Graphite. One thing I love about the Blackridge though is the versatility, seeing as this cooler can effectively be used in 4 different configurations. You've got the stock configuration out of the box with the stock 92mm fan underneath. Then if you have some VLP or very low profile memory DIMMs handy, you can swap that out for a higher performing slim 120mm fan. Or if you have the additional clearance available, you can mount a 120mm fan on top of the cooler. Whether that's a slim fan or full-sized fan depends on your clearance. The mounting brackets are also included in the box, and they're nice and easy to use too, both for the slim and full-sized fans. There's no reason why you can't run a dual fan setup like this either, bringing the total height to 62mm, and that's something that I did get around to testing. Now I don't have VLP memory here at the moment, but if you do have the opportunity to use that in your build, then you can use the slim 120mm fan underneath, and spoiler alert, that's going to be a very powerful low profile cooling option. A slim 120mm fan mounted on top of the cooler means that it will fill out the clearance of something like the Ghost S1 a little bit better, but still leaves some room between the side panel. Also, the stock fan is oriented as a push against the heatsink instead of pulling the air through it out of the box. This doesn't provide the best thermal results, as we'll see in a second. The fan itself is a pretty average slim 92mm fan. It spins up to 2800 RPM. I'd definitely recommend swapping this out to something quieter and more effective like the Noctua NFA 9x14. I'll leave that linked down below. Now in terms of mounting the Blackridge, it's an absolute breeze. Just install the mounting brackets onto the cooler and then screw it in from the back of the motherboard. Same process for both Intel and AMD sockets, just different brackets. Now probably the biggest compromise when it comes to the Alpenfohn Blackridge is compatibility. Although this is a really high performance cooler, as we'll soon see, to get that sort of performance, they really did have to utilize every square millimeter available that you can get on most motherboards, which means that it doesn't actually fit on some motherboards. So motherboards with a very tall VRM heatsink or a very tall I/O shroud, for example, like the Strix boards, the I/O shroud there will have to be removed. Just do some research on the specific board that you have because it may or may not fit. Now let's jump to the thermal results, starting with some brief testing with the i5-8400. So keep in mind this is while running Blender for 15 minutes on an open test bench. And as I mentioned previously, out of the box, the Blackridge cooler's fan is not oriented in the optimal direction. Just flipping the fan sees about a 5-degree drop for our i5 with pretty much no difference to noise. With the fan running as an intake, that's pulling air in through the heatsink and blowing towards the motherboard, we see that it's about even with the CryoRig C7G and the Noctua NHL12. At a TDP of just 65 watts though, we're not really loading up the coolers that much. That's why we don't see much of a big difference between these coolers here. Stepping up to the delitted 8700K test, the heatsinks get the opportunity to soak up a bit more heat. Here the Blackridge shows that it is in fact the better option over the identical height CryoRig coolers by a couple of degrees, but it has even more leverage when you swap out the stock fan. By swapping to the Noctua NFA9x14, their slim 92mm fan, we get a further 2-degree drop here, and certainly that value would be larger with a higher TDP processor. And not only do we get a slight temperature reduction, but noise levels were much better too. We'll take a look at that in just a second. At this point, we're about on par with Noctua's NHL12, although at a slightly higher noise level, but at around 20 mils lower clearance. I also found it to beat Noctua's L9x65, which is again a slightly larger cooler. In summary, at 47mm in height, the Blackridge can compete with coolers about 20 mils taller. That's pretty neat if you own a DNA 4 SFX, Velka 5 or a similar slim case. The versatility is pretty impressive too, by adding in a slim 120mm fan on top of the heatsink, making this a powerful dual fan setup at 62mm in height. I found the Blackridge to be a few degrees better than still taller options and be about even with Noctua's NHL12S. The L12S comes in at 70mm tall and has a much larger heatsink, although not as dense as the Blackridge. And by adding in a full-sized 120mm fan, stretching the height to 72mm, it's the most powerful low-profile heatsink that I've tested on this chart, although I struggle to recommend a case for this configuration. Out of the box though, the Blackridge is really loud, even louder than the CryoRig C7 at full blast. And man, those CryoRig fans are practically a jet engine, so the Noctua fan swap can't be recommended enough. The Blackridge also seemed a bit higher pitch in terms of noise compared to the other low profile coolers even with the Noctua fan swap, and I think that was due to the higher density of the fin array. When installed inside a case though, I don't really think that's going to be much of an issue. Here's an idea of what that sounds like. So usually when it comes to CPU coolers, you can pretty much well estimate how they're going to perform based only on the CPU cooler height. But at 47mm, this cooler is really impressive. I mean, it's competing up against coolers that are 60, 65, even 70 mils in height. So really this is an easy recommendation from me. If you have a Velka 5, this is the cooler to get. If you have any case that requires a CPU cooler that's under 50 mils in height, even under 60 mils in height, I would consider this. But yeah, definitely under 50 mils in height, this is the cooler to get. Also, if you have a DNA 4 SFX, I mean, it's a pretty much a no-brainer there. It was designed by the creator of the DNA 4 after all. The only better option there would be the 92mm AIO, but not everyone wants to go down that route. Also, if you do have VLP or very low profile memory, not this is just regular low profile memory, but if you do have the very low profile memory, you can then put a 120mm slim fan underneath, and that's not a configuration that I got around to testing today because I don't have VLP memory, but I can't even imagine what the cooling performance would be like there. That would be pretty insane. Now, I always get asked about the limitations of coolers. For example, can this run the 3900X? Can this run a 9900K? It definitely won't run a 3900X. It might run a 9900K if you reduce the power limit. This can definitely run a 3800X, the new Ryzen 8 core, and it should have no problem running the 9700K either. So that's it from me, guys. If you are interested in this, you can find out where to grab it down below. As always, a huge thanks for watching. Consider subscribing down below, and I'll see you all in the next one.